Thank you all for joining us today. It is my pleasure today to introduce one of my closest friends, Virginia Wilson, who now works in the Department of Homeland Security Office of Policy as part of Tiffin University's Women in Criminal Justice and National Security Speaker Series. This series focuses on the contributions and experiences of women who work in the fields of Homeland Security, National Security, and criminal justice. This experience is important not only because of the excellent work these women do in regards to their respective fields, but also because there remains a critical underrepresentation of women in security-related areas and in the college majors attendant to those areas. By having accomplished women like Virginia, as well as our prior visitor, Dr. Montgomery McFay, speak about their accomplishments, areas of expertise, and experience as part of the nation's security apparatus, we can enhance our own experience of these areas and gain a better understanding of the unique contribution women make in these areas. Virginia herself has more than 9 years of experience in policy, research, and strategy with the focus areas of terrorism screening, homeland and national security, and law enforcement. She is currently the Senior Policy Advisor in the Office of Policy, Department of Homeland Security. Ms. Wilson works to further DHS and U.S. government terrorist-related screening efforts through policy development, project management, interagency coordination, and communications management. In her role at DHS, Ms. Wilson coordinates with stakeholders to promote cooperation and support for key efforts and to communicate the impact that interagency and DHS decisions and actions can have on current and future efforts. She provides expert guidance and support on interagency and DHS screening efforts through oversight and liaison support. Ms. Wilson led the effort to develop recommendations for policies and processes that ensure consistency of vetting institutions across DHS programs to minimize vulnerabilities, improve security, and facilitate greater efficiency. She also supported the interagency response to develop corrective actions for terrorist watchlisting processes after the December 25, 2009 attempted bombing. Her efforts included drafting key memos and policy papers that articulated the department's etiquettes and identified areas in which DHS may be impacted by proposed new policies and processes. She earned her bachelor's and master's degrees in criminology, criminal justice at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas, my alma mater. Her thesis focused on the use of plea bargaining and sexual assault cases in New Jersey between 1996 and 2000. She's always happy to talk about that. During her tenure at Sam Houston State, she conducted research efforts that focused on criminal investigation, open source intelligence, and homeland security. She researched, wrote, edited, and formatted an open source intelligence text for use by law enforcement community to identify potential gang members, drug users, and domestic extremists through nonverbal means. And she has authored more than 10 professional publications. On a personal note, Virginia and I became friends in Texas when we were in graduate school together. That's nearly 9 years ago, and when her Texas accent was a lot worse than it is now. She's one of the brightest, most approachable people I've ever met. And I'm sure that after the presentation, she'd be happy to answer any questions that you have regarding DHS, the Office of Policy, or any other questions you have regarding working for the federal government. Thank you, and please welcome Virginia Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a great introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. I'm glad the mic is this short for people like me. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for hosting me today. As Josh mentioned, my name is Virginia Wilson. I am currently a Senior Policy Advisor at the Office of Policy at the Department of Homeland Security. Today, I will be discussing the role of and opportunities at DHS and provide you with some aspects of my background that may help you as you look towards your own future. I'm also looking forward to answering any questions you may have, whether it be, like Josh said, from a Homeland Security perspective, a federal career perspective, anything you'd like to talk about. To start with, how many of you are taking or have already taken a course in Homeland Security? Okay, so it looks like about half the room. So then, as most of you probably already know, at its creation in March 2003, DHS brought together 22 agencies from across the executive branch into one unified and integrated department. These components include what's commonly referred to as the Big Seven: U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Federal Emergency Management Agency, U.S. Secret Service, the U.S. Coast Guard, and Transportation Security Administration. Today, DHS is the third largest department in the government. We have over 240,000 employees and a total budget authority of about $60 billion. That is billion with a B. The department has a broad and diverse set of missions. We're responsible for, among other things, to prevent terrorism and enhance security, to secure and manage the U.S. borders, to enforce and administer U.S. immigration laws, and to safeguard and secure cyberspace, and ensure resilience to disasters. Our areas of authority include land, sea, air, and cyber. More than 90 congressional committees and subcommittees have some jurisdiction over DHS, nearly 3 times the amount of Department of Defense. Counterterrorism must and will remain the cornerstone of the DHS mission. The nature of our mission is that no news is good news. No news means no bombs, no explosions, no disasters, etc., etc. But no news does not mean complacency. No news is often the result of the hard work and dedication of the people within our government who prevent bad things from us ever hearing about. Today, in response to both 9/11 and evolving threats, and with the help and support of Congress, we have significantly adapted and enhanced our ability to detect and interdict threats at the earliest opportunity. The multi-layered approach employed by DHS allows us to improve security and to minimize the likelihood that any single measure becomes a single point of failure. So what is my role? As Josh mentioned, and I think as I have already mentioned, I'm a senior policy advisor within the Office of Policy in the Screening Coordination Office. My office coordinates the department's people-based screening and credentialing processes and programs to 1, facilitate legitimate trade and travel, 2, detect, deter, and deny access to or withhold benefits from individuals who may pose a threat to the U.S., and 3, ensure that privacy and redress opportunities are available to all. In essence, the Screening Coordination Office establishes an integrated policy framework across the department for people screening and credentialing programs that cover a variety of mission sets, such as counterterrorism, border security, aviation security, immigration processing, and credentialing standards. We have a department-level perspective that allows us to coordinate among the various components and programs and to understand cross-cutting similarities and differences to help ensure that each program aligns with the strategic direction of the department and to minimize potential redundancies or inconsistencies. So what does all of that really mean? In essence, we really just drive the policy framework for programs that support the key missions of DHS to ensure that these programs are consistently implemented across the department. My work is focused on terrorist-related screening efforts, specifically on the terrorist watch listing policies of DHS and the U.S. government. The bulk of my job is coordinating with DHS programs in the interagency to implement key efforts as directed from the White House and to advocate to the interagency the unique needs of DHS programs. This work is key for the successful implementation of any effort. Many agencies, or even offices within the same agency, tend to focus on how an effort will impact their office or agency and not look at the bigger picture or the impact to others. A great example of why coordination and communication are the keys to success is the interagency watch listing process. Terrorist watch listing is a multi-agency, multi-step process. While watch lists existed prior to 9/11, they were neither coordinated nor consolidated to a degree and depth commensurate with what we know the threat of terrorism to be today. The 9/11 Commission recommendations and subsequent government hearings and reports provided guidance to enhance the process and mechanism for identifying and preventing terrorist threats. The Terrorist Screening Center, administered by the FBI, maintains the Terrorist Screening Database, or the TSDB, which is the U.S. government's consolidated terrorist watch list, a single database of identifying information about those known to be or reasonably suspected to be involved in terrorist activity. The procedure for submitting information on individuals for inclusion on the terrorist screening database is referred to as the nominations process. It is through this process that individuals are added to the terrorist watch list. Nominations originate from credible information developed by our intelligence and law enforcement partners. Federal agencies submit their nominations of known or suspected international terrorists to the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC, for inclusion in its Terrorist Identities Data Mart environment, or TIDE. NCTC serves as the primary organization within the U.S. government for analyzing and integrating intelligence pertaining to terrorism and counterterrorism. Its main dataset, TIDE, is a classified repository that includes the underlying intelligence or derogatory information on subjects that may be associated with terrorism or terrorist activity. The National Counterterrorism Center reviews TIDE entries and transmits to the Terror Screening Center those entries that include sufficient biographic or biometric identifiers, as well as information that articulates how the individual is involved in terrorist activity. Similarly, the FBI collects, stores, and forwards information to the Terror Screening Center that has a purely domestic nexus to terrorism. Before placing any information into the Terror Screening database, the Terror Screening Center utilizes a multi-level process to ensure that the nomination meets the criteria for inclusion. Generally, the nominations to the Terror Screening database must satisfy two requirements. First, the facts and the circumstances that describe the person's association with terrorism, referred to as derogatory information, must meet the reasonable suspicion standard of review. Second, the biographic information associated with a nomination must contain sufficient identifying criteria so that a person being screened can be matched to or disassociated from a watchlisted individual. Because it is a sensitive but unclassified system, the Terror Screening database does not include any underlying derogatory or classified national security information. Once a known or suspected terrorist is identified and included in the Terror Screening database, the Terror Screening Center disseminates key identifiers to federal, state, and local partners, referred to as screeners. When a screener identifies a potential match to the Terror Screening database, that agency works with the TSC to confirm the match and determine the appropriate operational response. Various offices within DHS receive terrorist watch list information for use in a number of core mission activities, such as border screening, aviation security, and immigration processing. DHS contributes to all the activities I've just mentioned, not just from a personnel or enterprise perspective, but rather DHS is both a nominator of potential terrorists and a screening agency against TSDB information. DHS relies on the accuracy of each terrorist watch list record to carry out our core mission activities. The overarching terrorist watch listing process requires intense coordination and communication between all partners, from the nominating agency who has access to the underlying intelligence information, to the National Counterterrorism and Terror Screening Center who collate this data in their respective databases. So the screening agency that uses the terrorist watch list to appropriately identify an encounter with a known or suspected terrorist. As you can imagine, it is imperative for all players to think beyond their immediate boundary and ensure that every step and decision impacts others within their process. I'd like to wrap up the overview of DHS with a short discussion on the role of privacy and civil rights and civil liberties at DHS. DHS has the first statutorily required privacy office of any federal agency, and protecting privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties is a core mission of DHS. DHS builds privacy and civil rights and civil liberties protections into operations, policies, programs, and technology deployments from the outset of their development. Each program that handles personally identifiable information, or PII, is developed in accordance with the principles in the Constitution, the Privacy Act, and the Fair Information Practice principles. A trove of information is available on programs that handle PII and can be easily found online in the program's Privacy Impact Assessment and the system's System of Records Notice. The purpose of a Privacy Impact Assessment is to help the public understand what PII the department is collecting on behalf of the program, why it is being collected, and how it will be used, shared, stored, and protected. The Systems of Record Notice is a formal notice published in the Federal Register and open for public comment, required for any group or system of records that contain PII and from which information is retrieved via PII. I can attest that these publications are not merely rubber stamps for compliance, but rather are crafted to provide true transparency into activities that may impact the public. So how did I get here? As a student, I showed up a lot. I went to my classes, at least the ones in my major. I was involved in various academic organizations and looked for any opportunity at the college that could have an impact on my future, especially if it increased the likelihood that I would get to move somewhere new. During my second year of college, I applied for a job within my college's dean's office as a student assistant, a title that sounds much more glamorous than what it actually was. My first interaction with the dean was during an early morning shift when I was the only one in the office, and he asked me to connect him with the university's vice president. I thought, easy enough, I've used the phone before, I can do this. Well, I hung up on the vice president multiple times and slammed the buttons on the phone pad until the dean, my new boss, a really intimidating guy, came out and gruffed that he could just do it his own damn self. So, as completely humiliated as I felt that day, I kept showing up to work and was committed to proving my boss's first impression of me wrong. After a few months of making coffee and answering phones, still horribly, I was asked to do some occasional simple open source research. One of my early projects was, in essence, a research paper in support of a small grant to help law enforcement officers better identify persons of interest via evidence of their potential participation in certain subcultures. My boss decided that there was value in what I was doing, and he liked the path I was on, and the small project turned into a larger grant for me to research, write, edit, and format an open intelligence book for use by law enforcement community to identify potential gang members, drug users, and domestic extremists through nonverbal means. I said yes to all the work and opportunities I could find, and by the time I left, I had done everything at the college, from working on training programs for state and local law enforcement, to leading the logistics for big conferences and special delegations at the college, supporting the university's grant application process, and I had authored over 10 publications. I highly recommend doing things now that separate yourself from the crowd. Any opportunity that could possibly have a positive impact on your life, take the risk and just show up. Directly based on my work with the open source book I just mentioned, I was recruited by a big government contractor to be a summer intern. Literally during a layover on my way to the interview in Washington, I got a call from the manager I was supposed to interview with. She reneged on the internship offer and instead offered me a full-time position. A small salary, health insurance, the works. Instead of interviewing for an internship, she told me to come out, meet the team, and decide if I want the job. I took the risk. I spent the next few days in Washington with my new team and on Craigslist looking for a place to live. I went home, quit my job, packed up my life and my incomplete thesis, and moved to Washington. I converted to a federal employee about 2 years later, and I'm so thankful that I kept showing up and taking the risks for my future. Whatever you want to do with your future, your career, you have to take proactive steps to get there. My experience with gender. I recognize that this speaker series is focused on women and national security, and I'm guessing that some of the speakers will talk about their experience specifically as a woman in a male-dominated industry. My experience with the federal government and at DHS is that gender is very rarely a factor, but rather that the quality of work and dedication are the best indicators for how a person is treated. When I was in college and grad school, I constantly heard horror stories about other women's interactions as a law enforcement professional and saw for myself evidence of a thriving boys' club with different groups I worked with. I expected that gender would be a significant issue when I moved to Washington. Maybe it's because DHS is a young agency and that sort of culture hasn't been developed, or maybe it's because the 4 heads of my office have all been women, but I found that being good at your job and dedicated to your job and the mission is much more in how people treat you than your gender. To conclude, if you would like a job in the national security field, there are a number of roles and positions you can pursue. From a CBP officer at a port of entry determining a person's admissibility into the country, or working to turn raw intelligence into an actionable product, or doing investigative work at the local, state, or federal level, or like me, working to further national security via the development and implementation of key policies. I hope I've given you some good things to think about and overemphasized how important communication is, especially as the role of national security expands. I brought a slide with me that I believe you guys should all have now that lists some of the different opportunities available at the federal level. I imagine a lot of you are thinking about your future right now, and I want to provide a list of available resources to help you with your pursuit of a federal career. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm available for any questions or if you'd like to discuss any aspect of national security, Homeland Security, or a job in the federal government. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
You said that the different agencies within DHS talk to each would that include the fusion centers that are around the country as well?
Yes, the fusion centers definitely play a big role within DHS. And the fusion centers talk amongst themselves and within the different core agency representation that's at that specific fusion center, and also come back to DHS headquarters and speak with an office within DHS's Office of Intelligence and Analysis, and work at the headquarters level through them. Yes, sir.
So with the recent creation of fusion centers, has there been a lot of problems with local law enforcement using them to their abilities because they don't have the clearances that federal agents have?
I don't think I'm the right person to answer that. I will say that from a terrorist watch listing perspective, state and local law enforcement have access to that information through NCIC, the National Crime Index Centers system. And that is when local law enforcement or state law enforcement, they should all have access to it. And terrorist watch list information is available that way. As far as how state and locals work directly with the fusion centers, I'm not the right one to answer that.
Okay.
Any other questions? So how many of you are thinking about a career in federal law enforcement, or I should say in a federal job? So pretty much just this part of the room. Okay. So of those that raise your hand, who would be interested in a job at DHS? Maybe a couple. Okay. So for those that are not interested in a job at DHS but are interested in a federal career, what agency are you interested in joining? Yes?
I'm actually interested in joining DIA
Okay.
because of the intelligence base. I'm interested in government national security with the concentration of intelligence, so I would like to go to intelligence role.
Okay. Fascinating. Okay, good. Yes, sir.
I'd like to do Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the State Department.
Good answer. Okay. I don't know where you learned about that, but I am impressed with whatever class you learned that in. Bravo. Yeah, State Department gets a lot of underrepresentation and a lot of is underappreciated from the intelligence perspective. So I'm glad to hear that there is interest. So they've got a great office. Yes, sir.
It's a question to put you on the spot. I'm sure you and Josh have done a lot of talking about our Homeland Security program here at Tiffin. Or maybe you haven't, but if you've had a chance to take a look at it, what are your thoughts on it?
I have not looked at the course requirements at this point.
Okay.
But I think really any courses in Homeland Security to get your mind thinking about the topic, I think is great. And if any of you guys are interested in, the concentration of Homeland Security, there's so many opportunities available at DHS that I think just you're not even thinking about. I think there's a lot that we just don't know how much we don't know when you're first going in. So I would just recommend keeping your options open and just take any opportunities you can. What other questions? This is a very quiet group. Yes, sir.
What's the security clearance process like?
Sure. The security clearance process, it all depends on who you are. I think a lot of the big hangups that people might get a denial or might have a bit of trouble with is from the financial side. So if your financial side of the house is out of order, that's something I would recommend that you fix before you apply for a federal job. So if you have been, if you don't pay your credit card bills, if you don't pay any of your bills, then it's going to be tough for you to get a federal job. That's typically the biggest thing. I know previously, especially when I was in college, I always thought that it was the drugs aspect. And I think that's less of a determinator, unless you're doing heavy drugs, it's less of a determinator than finances. Don't do drugs though. Let me just emphasize that. You still can't do drugs and get a job, but I think my point is more that the financial side of things is really what gums people up. But don't do drugs. Okay. As far as the rest of the process, I think it can take anywhere from, I would say, 6 months to do just a general background investigation, up to maybe 18 months if you have a lot of information that needs that needs to be looked at. So especially, so like I said, the finances, the drugs, those are kind of the obvious ones. And also, if you have a lot of relationships with foreign nationals, so if you have family members that are not U.S. citizens, then it's not a deterrent by any means, but there's a lot of review that has to be done to look at the relationship that you have with those foreign nationals. So if you don't have any of those factors, it's a breeze. So filling out the paperwork is dreadful and it's painful, but other than that, it's fine. I mean, that's paperwork. That's the nature of it. So don't do drugs, get your finances in order, and figure out who you know that's not a U.S. citizen. Yes, sir.
While we're on that topic, what would you advise these guys about social networking as far as meeting the needs of the security clearance?
I think I said it in class earlier. Don't do anything stupid is kind of the rule of thumb. I don't think that having a Facebook account or having a Twitter or having an Instagram, I don't think that's going to prevent you from having a job. But if you have nudity on there, if you have, bad comments on there, if you have yourself doing anything illegal or anything to excess, these are all things to think about. Just don't be stupid and you're fine. Just don't do anything stupid anyway. But from a social media perspective, just be very conscious of what you're putting out into the world. Because remember, even if you put it out there and you take it down the next day, there could still be traces of it somewhere if someone really wants to find it. At least that's my assumption. So just watch what you put out there. Whether it's language, whether it's pictures, whether it's nudity, whatever it is, just don't be stupid. What other questions do you guys have? Yes, sir.
I think one of the concerns a lot of students have is, do I need to take particular courses to get a certain career, or how related does my coursework need to be to the specific agency I want to work for? Should I go to grad school? Things like that. Could you talk about how important you think specific types of education are?
Sure. I think from a coursework perspective, I think getting a degree is the number one thing to do. So whether that degree is in criminal justice or whether it's in business or social science, I think it's more about what you can show that you did during your 4 years at college or 5 years, however many years you're here. What can you really articulate that you did while you're here? If you wrote 16, 20-page papers, regardless of the subject, that shows that you're great at communicating, great at writing. But obviously if you want to go into a job in the federal government, in the national security field, having a basis in national security courses is very helpful because it gives you a leg up and you can understand the history of what's behind the organizations, and you can also understand the core missions and the core data or the core values of that organization before you even step in the door. As far as grad school is concerned, I got my master's degree. Most of the people under 40 that I work with have their master's degree already. Whether or not they worked for a year and then took graduate classes after they had started, or whether they went straight through from undergrad to grad school, it varies. But I would definitely say that at this point, having your master's is something I would highly recommend to everyone. If you have the ability to do it now, why keep that as an option. Like I said before, keep your options open. I think it's very tough. I know some people that have been in their career for 20 years that have gone back to get their master's, and it's very tough when you're working 40 plus hours a week to have another requirement on top of it. So I would say, to answer your question, I think having a master's is key. I think that the higher educated all of us become, the more competitive it's going to be from an education level to go out and get that first job. So if you can have something that separates you and sets you apart from the pack, I think that's key. Yes, sir.
What would you suggest to get your master's in?
What do I suggest to get? What do I suggest to get your master's in? Do you have something in mind? I mean, I think criminal justice and criminology are a great topic. As far as, I don't think that there's necessarily, how do I say this? I don't know if a master's degree in art history would help you in the federal government, but I think that if you got your MBA, that could be useful, because again, that goes back to communication, that goes back to some of the key tenets of any job that you're gonna get, right? Obviously, criminal justice is, ideal, depending on what you wanna do. I think it varies. What did you have in mind? Oh, just anything. Just, art history, something like that might be too specific for the federal government and national security. But I think generally speaking, I think it doesn't, I don't think that's as important as getting your master's. Yes, ma'am.
I see on the paper that the DHS has a Secretary's Honor Program. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like what it is?
I would love to, but I'm going to be very honest with you. I actually got this from my training coordinator. So I do not have any information besides what's on here, what's on that sheet. So, no, I cannot. I'm sorry. But I got this from someone else, so it must be true. So, What are any questions I can answer? I can answer on the other side of the paper. Any questions you have? Yes, ma'am.
I know for a lot of people the hardest part is like actually breaking into the intelligence field. Do you have any suggestions on how to do that?
So I think, for actually getting your first job, I think it's tough no matter what field you're going into, especially right now, which I'm sure you guys have been hearing for 5 years, is the economy is tough right now. There's a lot of people without jobs, so the market is getting more and more competitive. From a national security or the intelligence side, I think obviously the same is true. I would recommend trying to get in government as many different ways as you can. So whether that means applying for jobs on USA Jobs and going to other, agency sites and applying for those positions if they're not on USA Jobs, applying for internships, involving yourself in any of the programs that are on that sheet of paper for recent graduates, and also trying the private sector. So if you, just go on, a general job search engine and put in the keywords for Washington and find a big government contractor, that's also a great way to get your foot in the door and to get some experience. So I would just recommend, just shotgun your resume out there to as many people as you can and just see what sticks. And just know that it's a tough time and don't give up on it. That it might take some time, but if you're a junior or even a senior, start now as soon as you can, and put yourself out there and see what you can do. Are we all undergrads in here? No. Right, who's in the graduate program? Raise your hand.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Underclassmen, sorry about that.
Who's an underclassman then? Okay, good. So you guys have time. So what other questions do we have? Any underclassmen have any questions? Gosh, quiet group. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm completely ignorant to the process. In the military, you sign up, you commit your time, and once your contract's up, you basically, just integrate back into society. So what's the interview process or the application process like after you're done with submitting your federal resume and your KSAs and all that? How quick does the system shop you around, or how does that work? You sit down, you did that? Because I'm completely ignorant to it.
Yes, I'm happy to speak to that. So via USA Jobs, which is what DHS uses for all of our job availability, when you submit your resume, like you said, your KSAs, your knowledge, skills, and abilities, and you answer the 10 questions or so to see how competitive you are for that job, there's a first initial round that is typically automated on the back end. So it goes through and looks through the resumes or through the applications to determine, out of these, let's say, 500 people that apply for this one job, let's narrow it down to the top 100. So that's like the first step. The The second step is actually getting those 100 and having someone look at them and determining that way, out of these 100, who are the top 20 that we actually, want to push forward to the office manager, to the head of the office for potentially an interview. So then those 20 go to the actual boss in charge or whoever the hiring authority is. They look at those resumes and then they figure out who to interview. And then you get an interview, right? And then, then the decision is made and you get an offer letter and it has all the details with your entry on duty date or your start date and your GS level and your grade and your step level. As far as the timing of all of that, I know some things turn around. I've seen some places where that second step is met within 5 days. Sometimes it takes 3 months to get to just that one step. So unfortunately, there's no consistency across the board. I will also say that some positions will list how many available positions there are. So some positions might have, or some job postings might have 10 positions. Other postings might have 1 position. For those jobs that only have 1 position, the hiring authority is typically that you can only hire for that 1 position. So let's say that you and I go for the same job. We are both greatly qualified, only, my focus is in, let's say, terrorism, your focus is in intelligence, and the boss, looks at it and says, well, this one position is for terrorism, gosh, I'd love to have this other person in intelligence as well. There's not much flexibility to hire both people or to put you in another position, if that makes sense. So just watch out for that as well. So sometimes it's not that you weren't good enough for the job. Sometimes the hiring authority is limited to just 1 person, and finding that person is tough to do. Does that help at all? I know it's a non-answer of the timing can be anywhere from 3 months to God knows how long. Yeah, I mean, it just gets more and more complicated. So, but it's definitely not the military where you just sign up. It's a bit more difficult than that, unfortunately. Yes, sir?
Do you know of any like software programs such as, I don't know, the Analyst Notebook that would be at our disposal to help us with skills that we would need in the workplace for like intelligence and research?
No. And I would say no because, first of all, I can't think of any. Second of all, more importantly, most places have their own proprietary software and setup. So I'm trying to think of what would be useful to apply. I just don't think anything would be, I can't think of any specific program that would be useful for that. Unless you're trying to go into a very statistics focused job, then obviously with that you would want to learn some of the different statistics modeling software. But otherwise, no. Any other questions?
I think, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
We all, thank you.